I failed to hit my sales quota in 12 of my 20 years as B2B seller. And yet in those same 20 years, I managed to close over $160 million in SaaS revenue, including doing deals at or above $50 million. Being on both sides of that, having the years of missing quota and the years of closing massive deals, that taught me more than any sales training ever could. So in this video, I'm going to share the 5 lessons that had the biggest impact across my entire career, so you can skip the decade of trial and error and start to do larger deals faster. Let's get into it. Lesson 1, stop trying to sell better. The single biggest shift in my 20-year career was realizing that improving my sales skills was not the path forward. So for the first chunk of my career, I was doing what most reps do, trying to get better at prospecting, discovery, objection handling, closing, all these basic skills. And I was doing okay financially on the whole, but I was grinding hard for every dollar of it. So like in the first 5 years of my career, I made about $400,000 total over that period. And it was during that time that I was learning transactional selling. I was grinding through outreach and all about activity, and sales was a numbers game. Then in the next 5 years, I made about $800K during that period. And by that time, I had learned the basics, I knew the sales cycle, but I was still playing the same transactional game, except a little bit better. Now, in the third 5-year period, my performance more than doubled from there. And the reason for that jump and why it was so much bigger is because I stopped playing the transactional selling game entirely. What I mean by that is I stopped thinking of myself as a salesperson and I started thinking of myself as a business operator or a business executive. So instead of obsessing over my product pitch or my email sequences or how many cold calls I was making, I started obsessing over how my customers' businesses actually worked and how I'd be making decisions if I were running those businesses. So I'd study their revenue models, their competitive pressures, what their board was focused on, what their CEO was telling investors on earnings calls. And the reason this mattered is because executives who approve large deals don't care about your products or mine. They care about things like revenue growth, margin improvement, free cash flow. So when you can sit across the table from a C-level person and talk about those things in their language, something shifts. You're no longer a vendor trying to get a meeting. You're somebody they actually want to keep talking to because you understand one corner of their world almost better than they do. And to be clear, this isn't just a little mindset change. It should change how you spend your time every day. Now, if you're early in your career, yes, you need the fundamentals like prospecting, discovery, how to manage a pipeline, things like that. That foundation is super important. But there comes a point when doing more of that stops producing bigger results. You can't outwork your way to a $50 million deal just by making more cold calls. The shift is where you put your prep time. And instead of spending hours rehearsing your demo or optimizing your email subject lines, you're spending time reading the customer's annual report or their 401k, which is a form of an annual report, or listening to those earnings calls, things like that. The prep that earns you a seat at the table with senior executives. Because now you can walk in and say something that actually matters to them, that resonates at their level. You're not saying, hey, I have a widget, let's talk about how my widget can help. You're saying, hey, you're trying to get something done. I can see how you're doing it. You might want to consider a different approach. We've got 3 other stories that have moved the needle millions of dollars in similar customers. Very different resonance. That's a very different talk track, and you sound like you belong at the executive table when you can speak that way. Now, the sellers who I've seen who have broken through to 400K, 500K, even $1 million a year in earnings, they all made this same shift. They went from asking, how do I make my number, to how does my customer's business work and how do I fit into that? Lesson number 2, follow the money. This second lesson is all about the most underrated skill in all of enterprise sales, financial fluency. Now, when I say financial fluency, I don't mean you need to become an accountant. What I mean is that you need to be able to read financial disclosures, understand an earnings call, and explain how your customer makes money. But the thing is, most enterprise sellers cannot do this, and that's a problem. Because when the executives who sign off on large deals, when they're thinking in financial terms, when they're thinking of the earnings per share and the cost of capital, if you can't speak in that language and couch your value in that way, you simply can't have a meaningful business conversation with executives, and they'll push you down to somebody lower in their organization and you'll never get back. So here's a question I would challenge every enterprise seller to answer. How do you express and map how your product moves an important financial metric that the C-suite cares about. If you can answer that question clearly, you have an executive conversation on your hands that could be a path to a mega deal. If you can't, you're going to be relegated to somebody much lower down in the operations, pitching operational benefits to the level of people who can't approve anything meaningful. Now, the good news is this is a learnable skill and it doesn't take years to develop. You can start by going to the investor relations page of your top account. Every public company has one. Read the CEO's letter to the shareholders in the annual report. That's going to give you all the direction that you need in terms of what the company cares about achieving the most this fiscal year. Also, go listen to their most recent earnings call. Pay attention to the questions the analysts ask, because those are going to be the big pressure points that are coming down on management that they need to fix by the next earnings call 3 months down the road. Then pull their 10K. Again, the 10K is a form of an annual report. It's just done in the SEC disclosure format. Don't start by reading the whole thing. Just do a keyword search for words like competitive or risk or initiative, and you're going to start to see the signals of what they need to achieve, where their big priorities are, and where they're putting their money. Now, once you have that, you don't have to guess anymore about what's important to them. Now you have the raw material, the facts, to build a conversation, the beginning of a value story that will actually resonate with a senior customer stakeholder. And by the way, if you want to go deeper on any of this, I'm hosting a completely free financial fluency session where I break down exactly how to read these financial documents and turn them into insights that'll get executives to take your call. The link's in the description. Now, back to the video. Lesson number 3, get to the top fast. You can have the best preparation in the world, but if you're sharing it with the wrong people, it doesn't matter. And this is where most reps waste months of their fiscal year. The typical approach is what I call the mountain climber approach, where you start at the bottom of the customer's organizational chart and you try to climb your way up to the summit of the mountain where the executives are, and you try to get there. You're taking your steps one at a time. You talk to somebody who's an individual contributor, like a worker bee. Maybe they'll introduce you to their manager, and maybe 6 months down the road, you finally get a meeting with somebody like a VP. Meanwhile, every layer you pass through has somebody who wants to block you, not because your solution is bad, but because they don't want to stick out their neck for a vendor that they barely know. That's risky for them. The reps who close the massive deals do the opposite. They go to the top first or early. I use the analogy of mountain climbers versus heliskiers. Mountain climbers are trying to get to the top of the mountain, the accounts like in a mountain, to get to the executive at the top. And they take step after step, and they're climbing the mountain all by themselves. And it takes forever. A heliskier takes a helicopter to the top in 10 minutes and spends the rest of the day skiing down the other side, which is really engaging with the organization once you get the executive's blessing. In enterprise, your best helicopter is typically your own executive, or one of your board members, or one of your advisors, or a senior player within your ecosystem, somebody who already has a peer level relationship with the executive that you're trying to get to. It's just human nature. It's hierarchical in these large organizations. So when your CEO reaches out to their CEO, that's a peer-to-peer outreach. And those engagements happen fairly often. When a seller reaches out cold to a CEO trying to get a meeting, there's just more friction there. And although it's not impossible, and we should try it, it's definitely harder to engineer. So here's what leveraging your helicopter looks like in practice. So you do the body of work, the research, to build a compelling value hypothesis about why this customer would benefit from working with you to achieve something that's important to them. Not a product pitch, a value hypothesis. Then you prepare a short briefing document for your executive. You can use my briefing document template. It's in the description and there's a link there for it. So this briefing document would lay out what you know about the account, where you see the opportunity, who you need to get in front of, what the message is that they need to send to that person or deliver in a call. Then once you've agreed on a plan, you either ghostwrite an email for your executive or they do their own outreach to their counterpart on the customer side, peer-to-peer. Now, one of two things is going to happen at that point. Either the customer executive is going to be interested and they'll take the meeting, and now you have the opportunity for top-down sponsorship for a serious business conversation. Or they tell you, no, this is not something that we're going to do right now. You just saved yourself 9 to 12 months of chasing the wrong thing. Either way, you win. A fast no from the top is infinitely better than a slow no from the middle. And I can tell you that from experience, why this works is I routinely would set up calls with super senior industry players on my company's board of advisors, and it always surprised me how quickly they could get me in front of previously unreachable customer executives. The best part was when they did that, I was positively pre-framed in the eyes of the customer executive because of the quality of the introduction. That completely jumps over 5 layers of worker bees and mid-level players who would never have sponsored me up to that level on their own. Lesson 4, think bigger than you are right now. This easily made the biggest financial impact in my career, and it probably will for you too. See, most sellers have a mental ceiling around deal size. They sell what they're comfortable with, what they're used to, and they keep repeating that same motion over and over. It's like hitting a different kind of glass ceiling. So for example, if your average deal is $100K, that becomes grooved in your mind, and at some point you start to believe this is what customers will pay. And this is where you find this mental limitations. If you're used to doing 100K deals and you've never done anything bigger, at some point that repetition cuts a groove in your mind and you begin to think this is about as much as customers are going to be willing to pay. Even when there's a much larger opportunity possible, you might not see it. There's actually a psychological reason why this happens. Behavioral economists call it anchoring. Your past deal size becomes the reference point your brain uses to judge what's reasonable or possible. So if most of your deals are around 100K, that becomes your internal definition of a possible deal. And when the opportunity starts looking like it could be something much bigger, your brain might go into defense mode. You might lower the initial price. You might discount earlier than you should. You might start second guessing whether the customer would ever pay what really it should be for a much larger deal. Not because the value isn't there, but because you've never done a deal that big before. It's like going in a skyscraper elevator. The higher you go, the more fear of heights you might experience. So here's an exercise that I recommend to any seller that wants to break out of this. Pick your top account and simply visualize what a massive deal would look like. Why would they do a massive deal with you? What level of value would they need to get to justify a deal that's 10 times something that you've normally done? How much of your product would they need to buy? How many seats or servers or data points or whatever your metric is? What would constitute a massive deal and why would they do it? And simply dream it up, because if you can't even picture it, you're never going to be able to execute it. Then you take the research that you do on that very same account and you look for how can I get into the swim lane of one of the big initiatives that they're doing where they've funded millions and millions of dollars to solve a really big problem. Maybe your product can't solve the whole problem, but if it can support getting the whole thing done, being a contributor to that outcome, you have a really good path. The moment you understand the financial value your solution would deliver inside of that account relative to the investment, the big number starts to make a lot more sense. And once it starts to make sense with you, you can sell it with confidence. Let me give you an example of what happens when a rep actually thinks this way. Alpesh Patel was a seller at Salesforce, and he was selling to a large insurance company. And instead of just trying to sell them seats, he did something creative. He got his own insurance license and became a part-time agent for that insurance company. Then he dove into all of their agent-facing applications and found them sorely lacking in terms of effectiveness. So he saw the opportunity to write a full assessment with his team, and they recommended a path to modernize that company's entire selling experience for their agents. And this study was not a white paper, it was like a novel. And he sent it directly to the CIO. That assessment kicked off a major IT transformation and partnership with Salesforce. And that rep wound up standing on the stage at President's Club, getting the award for the biggest deal of the year, and he was handed a 6-foot-long, multi-million-dollar commission check. Now, the takeaway here is not that you need to go get some kind of certification in your customer's industry. The takeaway is that when you invest the time to understand your customer's problems at a deep level and the amount of money that your solutions could make or save for your customer, you will see the value as clear as day. And that will enable you to have much more confidence in putting large numbers on the table, because you'll see how your solution can lead to massive financial payoffs for your customer, which is something that you'd never see in an average deal. Lesson 5, you can't win alone. One of the most important lessons in enterprise selling is this: you can't close large deals by yourself. Most sellers are wired to be self-reliant. We want to own the deal, run the process, control the outcome. But as deals get bigger, the number of stakeholders grows dramatically. So on the customer side, you might have 10, 15, 20 people or more involved. Business leaders, architect, users, finance, legal, compliance, procurement. One person simply can't manage all those relationships, which means your deal team needs to grow to match the size of the customer's evaluation team. Typical sellers run deals like it's just them and their solutions engineer. Elite sellers operate more like field marshals. They recruit people across their organization: executives, product leaders, value engineers, consultants, implementers, customer success. They have a much larger team. Now, there's an important nuance as you're building your deal team, and it's around executive alignment. Often the best executive conversations are not led by leaders in the sales organization on your side, because customer executives frequently want to engage with leaders who actually can deploy resources inside your company, not just those who are responsible for driving or closing new business. So oftentimes, somebody who's better for that would be a product executive or a services leader or some other senior operator. They're peer-to-peer conversations that are natural parts of the engagement. When you bring these bigger deal teams, your role is going to change. You're not going to be doing all the talking all the time. You're not sitting back and just listening. Elite sellers are actively managing the room. So that means reading the room, capturing the dynamics, remembering the points you're going to need later to advance the deal, and basically holding that red thread through all of the meetings, because you're the one who's got to keep the whole thing into one cogent value story. So as your role shifts, you're going to be shifting from thinking, I got to be the player on the field making all the plays. Like in American football, that's the quarterback, or in rugby, that's the fly half. I got to be the person who makes everything happen on the field. I encourage you to shift that to become the coach on the sideline, because the coach is the one who deploys the right players on the field at the right part of the game to make the right plays. That's orchestration, and that is the summation of bringing all these skills together to be able to choreograph the buying cycle for these large deals. So if you want to go deeper into any of this, especially the financial fluency piece, which I think is the biggest missing skill that most sellers don't have, click the link in the description below and just sign up for my totally free financial fluency session, where I'm going to walk through what you need to know as a seller in terms of financial concepts, financial terms, how to spot financial signals, and how to turn those into value stories that your customer executives will really engage around. And if you want to see the path to making over $1 million a year in tech sales, watch this video next.